Welcome to the Rooted Healing podcast, where we seek to deepen our kinship with the living world and with the great mystery that runs through us. This is a space where stories heal with words that weave us closer to our wild and daring natures, bringing together the expansive minds, topics, and ideas that help us heal, reimagine, and co-create the world we wish to thrive in.
On the whole, we need a cultural shift. This Western individualistic world that we're living in, it's just not serving us. So where do we go from there? We're killing ourselves, we're killing the planet's anxiety, and depression is on the rise globally, and it's kind of gloom. It's a glum outlook. We can try to medicate ourselves out of that, and we can disconnect ourselves and try our best to run faster in the hamster wheel, but the system that we're in, it's just not designed for us. It's a zoo in effect. It's not our natural environment where we're in groups of 150 to 200 people or something, and everybody is interconnected. So the cultural shift has to kind of begin towards reciprocity in general. But then if we look at the psychedelic world, I think it's just very important for the people there to be mindful of it and to be awake to talk about these things. When we are dealing with these medicines, that we have some kind of connection to the cultures, to the tribes, to the lands that they come from, that we are giving back, so that we're just not taking and that we're also giving.
Lilja Þorsteinsdóttir is a psychologist from Iceland who specialises in group psychedelic integration, healing trauma and the emotional and physical symptoms in women in particular, harm reduction, and treating addiction and chronic pain and illness. She has created a safe platform full of courses to help people get in touch with their playfulness and creativity, increasing people's self-understanding and connection with themselves and with the world around them. I met Lilja whilst we were both working at a plant medicine centre in the Andes of Ecuador a few years ago now, where we were both really immersing ourselves in ancient traditions and practices to deepen our understanding of timeless healing spaces and mind-altering healing modalities. I'm going to keep this intro short and let the conversation speak for itself. There's definitely things covered that need to be talked about more often, including some interesting perspective on the risks involved with psychedelic healing spaces that are led from misalignment and lack of education. And just a quick note before we jump into the episode: don't forget to rate and review the show if you're enjoying it, and let me know how these conversations are landing with you. Lilja, it is so wonderful to have you here on the Rooted Healing podcast. I always learn something new when we speak, so I'm excited to see where we go to today.
Thank you for having me. So nice to be here with you.
Can you briefly introduce us to the work you do and how you came to focus on psychedelic integration amongst the many other services you offer?
So I am a psychologist. I've been working in mostly physical rehabilitation for over 10 years now. My main areas of interest and specialization is trauma and addiction, chronic loss of health or chronic pain. The way I got into the psychedelic work was that I came across Michael Pollan's book just after I had my first experience with psychedelics on my own. I kind of just got this feeling of, because as I say, I've been working for 10 years, there's this whole research area of psychedelic that was just hidden really from the main education. We never learned anything about it in school. And so I kind of felt like betrayed a little bit to not have learned anything about this, because there were like a few decades of research, at least 2 decades of research before it was just shut down for political reasons. So I went to Ecuador to become a volunteer at this ayahuasca retreat where we two met. to kind of get in touch with the medicines where they are legal and where there's a frame for working with them, where there is tradition around them. There's this psychedelic movement going on in the world, and there's the same here in Iceland. There's a lot of psychedelic, like and a psychedelic undercurrent. But of course, because they're not legal here, it's all kind of hidden under the surface, and it's not regulated at all. And but at the same time, like everywhere else, the demand is big. Knowing what I know now is that psychedelics are a very sharp tool, but just like with any other sharp tool, you can do a lot of good with them, but you can also do a lot of damage with them. And also the fact that, taking psychedelics is one thing, but psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is a whole different ballgame. And that's where all the research that is coming out now is focusing on psychedelic assisted therapy and not just people taking psychedelics. Because of that demand, I decided to design a course for people here that want to know the psychedelics a little bit more. And it's kind of like with a harm reduction approach to it. I can't really do anything about the psychedelics themselves. I can't get close to them because of legal status, but what I can offer is that I can educate people beforehand, and I can help them with integration afterwards. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm holding courses where people get some education in groups beforehand and then afterwards also. And doing it in groups is, in my view, an important aspect of psychedelics, because that's how they were traditionally used.
Yes, that's a really important point to make. We both have been immersed in ceremonial healing practices with indigenous approaches to using hallucinogenic plants for healing. And these traditions are from time before time and are from indigenous groups that have their own communities that understand this approach to healing. So when, in terms of integration, you are leaving a ceremonial space within a community who are already connected to each other, who understand what you have experienced, who are viscerally connected to place and nature, and simply that understanding alone is very unifying for a person's integration process. Whereas in Western culture, we have people returning to their normal lives, which are more often than not completely disconnected, unsupported, busy, and overwhelming. And so in terms of integrating into this modern model of living, do you have any reflections on the challenges around this? And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the clinical psychedelic assisted therapy approach versus that group circle healing experience.
Yeah, I feel like, there's a part that's kind of missing. Often how psychedelics are being introduced in the West is because we have a different kind of social structure than in these indigenous communities. In the indigenous communities, we have this collaborator culture, while here we have a very individualistic culture. These medicine, they help you connect not only to yourself, but as you say, to nature and to others. Of course, they can be utilized in this one-on-one therapeutic settings as we're doing in the Western Hemisphere. I think there's a lot to say about this communal healing, and I hope we can see more of that coming into the Western approach to psychology in general, to be honest, because we're not individuals, really. We experience ourselves as individuals, but really we are a part of a whole system.
It's like the prayers and teachings we have been immersed in, Ahoma Takiasi, to all my relations. This path of remembrance, of when you do step into these ceremonial, communal healing spaces, it is all about interconnectivity, about our place in the web of life with each other, with all our relations. I'm picturing you now calling in from Iceland, Reykjavik, and the rugged landscape there. And I remember you singing the most harrowing, beautiful Icelandic folk songs in ceremony. And I'm curious how your homeland is in need of healing and how this is shaping the work you do.
Well, Iceland is a very traumatized society. It's a really harsh land. Traditionally, people, they just had to survive. There was no room for anything other than surviving. I mean, it's only like a few generations ago your kid would die and it was just not talked about anymore. You just had to go out and fish or cut the grass for hay or whatever you did back then. So you just had to shut off your feelings and continue in order to survive. And this has created a really harsh personality, a harsh and closed shell, characteristic of the nation, if I may say so. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma here that needs to heal.
Well, I would love to talk more about trauma and the memory that the body and mind contains of the shock and trauma and how it can manifest in physical and psychological symptoms for the rest of our lives. I think we often wrongly define trauma and think of it just as these extremely traumatic moments, which are obviously major trauma, but my understanding is, since working with so many people in healing spaces, is that we have all experienced some level of trauma. And I have a quote I'd like to read by Bessel van der Kolk from The Body Keeps the Score. Quote, "Traumatized people chronically feel unsafe inside their bodies. The past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. Their bodies are constantly bombarded by visceral warning signs, and in an attempt to control these processes, they often become expert at ignoring their gut feelings and in numbing awareness of what is being played out inside. They learn to hide from their selves." End quote. I would love it if you could talk a little bit about trauma and how it shapes us.
So that quote is really good, and it kind of reminds me of another quote by Gabor Maté, that the trauma is not the thing that happened, but the thing that happens as a result, which is the disconnection from yourself. Something happens and it's just so painful to be you at that moment that you have to kind of leave yourself, so you abandon yourself in that moment, which I think is a pretty accurate description in many cases, like how you disconnect and you abandon yourself over and over again because it just hurts. The definition of trauma is like the prints that sit in your brain and your body afterwards. I think with psychological trauma it's not very different from physical trauma. If you look at the molecular level, all our feelings are neurotransmitters that are swimming in our blood and affecting all of our systems. Everybody gets trauma in their life. You can't really go through life without having any trauma. Just like when you grow up, you fall and you scrape your knee, and that's like a trauma on your knee. So trauma is on a spectrum from very little to very big, and most traumas heal on their own. That's how the body is designed. It's designed to repair itself, whether it be physical or psychological, if it has the right environment. It's kind of all in how you treat the trauma afterwards, and we're pretty good at doing that with physical trauma. Like if you break your leg, for example, everybody knows the process that's going to be happening. You're going to be putting your foot in a cast, and then you have to be on crutches for 6 weeks, and then like it's a known process. That's how traumas heal. If you take care of them in an appropriate way afterwards, the physical wound has a much better chance to heal correctly. But then we have this psychological traumas, and it's less known how to kind of work with them, or it shouldn't really be less known. Instinctively we know what it is that we need sympathetic other to see us and see, I see your pain and I can see that it was difficult for you, and we need that compassion. By doing this aftercare in the correct way, the trauma has a much better chance of just healing. And that also, it kind of leads me into these 3 basic emotional systems that we have in our bodies. And I often just use like the traffic lights. You have the green area, and then the yellow area, and then the red area. Green is safety, yellow is danger, and red is life threat, okay? So you have, when you're in the green area, your body is in homeostasis. That's where your breathing is relaxed and your heart is beating at a slow rate and everything is okay around you. Things don't have to be perfect, but there's no danger that is coming for you. And in this kind of homeostasis, that's where we can digest both our food and information, and that's where the body has a chance to heal itself. That's when reparations can be done. But then something happens around you or inside you, and the body kind of decides that there's danger, and so it thrusts you into either of the 2 danger or defense systems. If it is danger that the body estimates that it can do something about, it can either run away or it can fight the danger, then it thrusts you into the yellow area, which is fight-flight, and that is experienced as anxiety or anger or irritation or something like that. Did you ever watch the cartoon Transformers when you were a kid?
No, I didn't.
Okay, but you know what cartoon I'm talking about?
I think so.
Where they kind of, like on a millisecond, they can change themselves from robots to cars, and I always get this image in my head when I'm talking about the fight-flight system, because like it only takes a millisecond and adrenaline comes from your kidneys and it just goes all around your body and it affects every single system in your body in order to make your body ready for peak physical exertion for a short time. Your lung pipes get wider to get more oxygen to your lungs, and your focus gets narrower, your eye focus gets narrower, and your blood goes from your middle area to your limbs so that you can run faster, and your liver puts like extra glucose into your body to give it extra energy. So there's like every single system in your body is just prepped for this physical exertion for a very short time. It's an ancient system. It's like 200 million years old. And to put that in perspective, the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. You're designed to go from 0 to 100 and back to 0. And that's like the fight-flight, the yellow area. And if the body estimates that there is danger, but you're not going to be able to do anything about it, you're cornered and you're helpless, and the aggressor is much bigger than you, then it thrusts you into the red area, which is life threat. And that's known as freeze, collapse, or shutdown. And that's basically when you get paralyzed by fear. And that is experienced as hopelessness or helplessness. And people that are there for a very long time, they are often diagnosed with depression. That's basically what depression is. You're in this life threat area for a very long time. And if you're in either of these 2 defense systems, you can't digest anything. You can't digest your food, and you can't digest information. You can't digest the experiences that you're having. So this is why when something big happens that overwhelms this system of ours and thrusts us in the defense systems, that's when trauma happens. And that's when we need to afterwards digest it and try and go through the experience while being in the green zone.
I've never heard that description of the red zone associated with depression, and that makes so much sense. I want to read a quote by Dr. Gabor Mate in reference to what you said earlier. Quote, "The greatest damage done by neglect trauma, or emotional loss is not the immediate pain they inflict, but the long-term distortions they induce in the way a developing child will continue to interpret the world and her situation in it. All too often, these ill-conditioned, implicit beliefs become self-fulfilling prophecies in our lives. We create meanings from our unconscious interpretation of early events, and when we forge our present experiences from the meaning we've created, unwittingly we write the story of our future from narratives based on the past. Mindful awareness can bring into consciousness those hidden, past-based perspectives so that they no longer frame our worldview. Choice begins the moment you disidentify from the mind and its conditioned patterns, the moment you become present. Until you reach that point, you are unconscious. In present awareness, we are liberated from the past. End quote. And that's from The Realm of Hungry Ghosts. It's making me think of how these healing methods and approaches, how much of it is bringing awareness to the process, like, for example, through talking therapy. But then you need that presence with your body, and not everyone has the opportunity to go and be monks in the mountains and really get and foster that real presence. And this is where psychedelics are an incredible tool, can be, so that we can learn what it is to be truly present and connected to our bodies and to our surroundings, to ourselves, to each other. When it comes to bringing that awareness in and helping people realize that they are living in the orange or red light, how do we, in terms of a somatic approach to this work, how do we eradicate that mind-body separation and help bring people into this presence, into the body in order to heal? And since it is the body that remembers, how do we go into the body to heal?
Well, I think the first thing is just education, because we've been stuck with this dualistic worldview since the 1700s. It's a paradigm that has done a lot of harm, really, not only to us, but as a species, but also to the ecological system. Like that you can separate mind from body, and that you can separate a person from their environment. So education, I would think, would be the first thing. How the mind affects the body, how the body affects the mind. And then we, of course, have all these different techniques. And fortunately, research into this mind-body connection is on the rise. Research is confirming all these old ancient healing techniques like dancing and chanting and rhythm and everything like that. There are so many ways in order to get yourself back into your body. Yoga, dance, singing, all these beautiful approaches. We've been using the same healing modalities for thousands of years. Everywhere in time or in place, you see the same healing modalities being used. And right now, the Western science is catching up and doing research on it. And like, oh, okay, so this actually does work. Oh, great, thanks for that. This colonial thinking of this hierarchical thinking of the Western science as on top, that we have to understand everything through this Western paradigm.
Yes, it is often a lot more simple than we perhaps think. In terms of education, I don't see why we're not learning things like how to relate with each other, how to listen to our bodies. These are things we could be taught from the age of 5 onwards. And imagine how much more awareness we would have as adults about our needs and the needs of others.
That wouldn't serve the current system, the current capitalistic system that we're living in. Everything is designed to disconnect us from our bodies. And it's a system that we're all, it's a huge system that we're all kind of a part of. And it's only serving very few people. But everything is directed towards that disconnection.
Productivity rules, yep. You focus a lot on harm reduction, And you've used the metaphor of psychedelics as a sharp tool with the potential to cause harm as well as healing. So can you share a little about what harm reduction is and steps people need to think about before diving into an experience like this?
Yeah. Well, harm reduction, education is so important that people know what they are going into and who is going to be going with them, what to expect. I remember there's this quote, I think it was from, I can't remember who the quote was from, I think James Fadiman or something, that kind of likened psychedelics, taking psychedelics for the first time is a little bit like having sex for the first time. In that, you want it to be very gentle and nice and carefully done. And if it's not done like that the first time, it can have lasting consequences. Doing it like right, having somebody around that you trust. As you're going into the psychedelic space, all your defenses, they just vanish. So you're very vulnerable. So having a person that you trust completely to respect your boundaries, to take care of your well-being, it's a very important thing. That's kind of, in my view, kind of the biggest, one of the biggest dangers about this is how, because the psychedelic space isn't regulated, there's this gold rush feeling to it. And there are so many people that, most people of course are doing this with authenticity, and they've experienced this themselves and they want to help others. But there is the risk of both the wounded healer that hasn't done their own self-work, and that kind of bleeds into a person's psychedelic experience, the person that is supposed to be, having the experience. And then there's also this danger that, because psychedelics it's a really strong experience. It's a huge experience in most people's lives. According to research, most people, like over 60 to 80% of people, they regard the psychedelic experience as one of the top 5 biggest experience of their lives. So it's a really remarkable experience. And there is a certain type of people that likes to be the person giving others that kind of experience. So like these ego-centered personality structures, that's where a bit of a danger lies, because people with a very egocentric personality structure, what has been found is that psychedelics don't really help them. Most people that take psychedelics have this capacity to look within and look critically at themselves. And they get this feeling of, I am special, yes, but I am not the only one that's special. We're all special. I am God and you are God. With the more egocentric personality structures, we more often see that I am God and you are not. So you get this megalomania into the mix. It is fairly common for people with this kind of personality structures to jump at calling themselves shamans and starting to lead people into the experience, maybe with very limited experience of either psychotherapy or even psychedelics.
That is so interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that before. I've crossed paths with many people who do 2 ayahuasca ceremonies in the jungle and then go home and call themselves shamans and start offering ayahuasca ceremonies and ordering it off eBay or something. And it's terrifying. I've also been in ceremonies where I've overheard people say at the end that they're going to start doing this back in LA. And I've heard that there's quite a shocking culture there in particular, where medicine is being offered in spaces where you could really question the integrity and safety. So it is a really paradoxical industry. Not that I want to even call it an industry, but it is worth noting that these practices attract the egocentric personalities who are also not seeing that part of themselves, instead of being given Jesus-like status.
You hesitate by calling it an industry, but I think in some ways, it is becoming a bit of an industry, and it's taking these holy and sacred medicines and thrusting them into this Western capitalistic, individualistic society. And we're kind of forgetting both that the medicine themselves, they are not a panacea, they're just like a facilitator of what's inside of you, but also we have to be careful about like how we implement these medicines into Western society. And I think it's really important to stress the reciprocity, like a link to a community, because we're borrowing these traditions from communities that have held them for thousands of years, and then we take them and we thrust them into our society, and often without maybe implementing all the structures that are around it. And in these ancient traditions, you sit for many years before you even touch the medicines themselves, and then people come into the jungle, as you say, take a few journeys and call themselves a shaman. It's dangerous. I think people should be aware of the red flags for example, if people are trying to push them to do psychedelics, or if there's anything at all that kind of comes up in your gut feeling to listen to it.
I'm curious, you've spoken about the sacred medicines and in terms of reciprocity. And this is a huge topic for the spiritual or self-help culture that is here. Dory Joy spoke about it in an episode I did with her, calling it middle-class-itis, where there is this need, this desperation for awakening or belonging, and we're all feeling it regardless of class or culture, but put into this consumerist instant gratification society. She said, it's like goji berries and then quinoa and then ayahuasca. And she's right. This word reciprocity, I'm curious how many people even know what it means. The question is, how do we give back? At what point do we seriously look at giving back? How do we heal in a respectful way? And how do we bring awareness around this? And I was thinking of how psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is using the chemical derivative of the plant or animal secretion. What are your thoughts on the chemical manufactured versions of these medicines, and in this extractive style we often have in the West?
Well, in some cases I think it's a good thing, like with my 5-MeO-DMT, the Bufo alvarius toad, it's coming under threat now because there's just so many people trying to get the medicine from the toads. Whereas you can actually just manufacture the 5-MeO-DMT at a lab and leave the poor toads alone. So in these cases where it kind of helps with sustainability, I would say it's absolutely preferable in my view. Like, for example, now all these venture capitalists that are trying to isolate the active thing from the psilocybin without giving you the trip, which is, of course, an integral part of the experience, that I think is very misguided. But in terms of how do we give back, how do we practice this reciprocity, I think it's just very important for everyone that is coming into this field, whether it be a therapist or a guide or anyone that's working with the medicines, to, on the whole, we need a cultural shift. This Western individualistic world that we're living in, it's just not serving us. So where do we go from there? We're killing ourselves, we're killing the planet's anxiety, and depression is on the rise globally, and it's kind of gloom. It's a glum outlook. We can try to medicate ourselves out of that, and we can disconnect ourselves and try our best to run faster in the hamster wheel, but the system that we're in, it's just not designed for us. It's a zoo in effect. It's not our natural environment where we're in groups of 150 to 200 people or something, and everybody is interconnected. So the cultural shift has to kind of begin towards reciprocity in general. But then if we look at the psychedelic world, I think it's just very important for the people there to be mindful of it and to be awake to talk about these things. When we are dealing with these medicines, that we have some kind of connection to the cultures, to the tribes, to the lands that they come from, that we are giving back, so that we're just not taking, and that we're also giving. And then also to emphasize this servitude that is so integral in many of these cultures. Like the shaman told us in Ecuador, serving is the highest purpose. And this society that we're in today, we're more in taking rather than giving and serving. Emphasizing it to everyone that is willing to listen, to give back, whether it be to the local communities, to people that come after you. Other things that can be done is shifting the language from shame and stigma towards compassion and empowerment, because usage of language really matters, how you frame things and people.
Absolutely. It is so needed, especially in these spiritual cliques. I've certainly bear witness to practices really lacking in reciprocity. Even where we worked together and met, I have questioned the culture in general around ayahuasca centers as a business structure. This churning out of people with no ongoing connection or support, and missing the opportunity to invite giving back and supporting the people and place that are housing these healing, life-changing experiences. You also work with addiction, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that before we round off our conversation. Maybe you can speak a little bit about addiction in general and how we are all probably addicted to something in some way or another.
Yes, I really like Gabor Mate's definition of addiction as thing or behavior that gives you short-term pleasure but long-term harm, and you try to stop but you can't. And if you look at that definition, you can see that we're all addicted to something, somewhere, at some point in our lives. In essence, addiction it's a meaningful response to your life circumstances, whether it be your inner environment or your outer environment. It's an attempt at self-regulation, to regulate your emotions, and you develop this kind of unhealthy relationship, be it to behavior or to a substance. How do you create an environment that you don't want to continuously flee from? And so harm reduction is, in my view, the only approach that makes sense when you're dealing with addiction. Harm reduction is the first step to recovery, kind of, because that's with these harm reduction principles, you're coming to the individual and you're welcoming the individual where the individual is at. There's been a lot of emphasis on, for example, abstinence-only models, which in my view is, it can work for some people, but it's quite ineffective to treat everyone. Some people don't want to stop, some people don't have to stop, some people can't stop. There are other ways of measuring success than whether you have used your substance or not. How are you functioning in your life? How are your relationships? How do you feel? How's your health? Are you able to go to work? I also often think that we kind of forget that taking some mind-altering things, substances, is something that it's older than Homo sapiens. This is something, animals also try and get into an altered state of consciousness. So it has been with us from before we were human. And if we look at society today and the humankind today, it's almost 100% that use some kind of mind-altering substance. The most common one is caffeine and alcohol, many other substances. It kind of differs from world part to world part, which mind-altering substance is both the most common and the most accepted. Then you have some substances that have, for political reasons, been banned. And again, we can trace that back to colonialism, because we're trying with this to keep some populations down. Giving people the license to be who they are, And only there can healing begin.
Healing can only really begin with self-acceptance and societal acceptance, community empowerment, and not shaming or stigmatizing each other and our choices.
Absolutely. Johan Hari, he put it quite well when he said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. By stigmatizing certain drugs, certain substances, then you're also stigmatizing the people that use them. And when you stigmatize somebody, then you marginalize them and you push them away. So where does that leave a person? The foundation is just this person's trying to regulate their emotions. They're just trying to survive in the world somehow, and they're using, maybe happen to be using a substance that arbitrarily is banned in this part of the world. It just does not make any sense at all. And yeah, it's just unfair.
Yeah, I love that quote. The opposite of addiction is connection. It really resonates. Can you tell me about your approach? As I know you personally, I know that play and creativity are immensely important when it comes to healing. And in terms of connection, why is it that play and creativity are so needed with this work?
Well, it is said that if you're going to be learning a new thing, you need 400 repetition, but through play you only need 20 repetitions. I think it has to do a lot with the fact that we are a tribal species, we are herd animals, and we are designed to... There's a new field that is called interpersonal neurobiology. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it, yes.
It's just the science of communication, basically, and how we all are interconnected. And there's this analogy that I like to use. Have you heard of the Wood Wide Web?
Yeah.
The Wood Wide Web is, if you look at a forest of trees, you think you're looking at a bunch of individuals, and then when you look under the ground, you can see that they're all interconnected into this root and fungal system.
Yes.
And through this fungal system, there's a lot of communication going around. They're waging wars, and they're sending information on pests, and they're giving nutrition and all kinds of behavior and reciprocity going on in the trees. I like to use this analogy for us as humans because we are kind of like the trees. We're exactly like the trees, actually, in the way that the connection between us, it doesn't show with our bare eyes, but it's very much there. One positive or negative word from the person next to you and everything inside you just goes haywire. We are so interconnected. We're not individuals more than we are a system, and we are part of a system. It's very connected to attunement and rhythm. There's a quote from, I can't remember her name. She wrote the book Braiding Sweetgrass, and the quote is, "Your mother's heartbeat is your first language." And it speaks on how rhythm is very important in healing. And then now we're going back to the old healing modalities, but also the rhythm of us, the rhythm of communication. If you're attuned to somebody, then you feel good. If you're with a friend, you start walking in rhythm, you start talking in rhythm. There's this rhythm to the communication, this synchronicity and attunement, and that is what is very healing. And we're talking about trauma before. In many cases, trauma is... Often we come out of our childhood, maybe not with any of the big traumas or not even abuse or neglect, but we have an inattuned parent. So they maybe were trying their best, but you didn't sync with them. So you didn't get what you needed. And that is in this attunement. To recreate this attunement through play and through joy. So it's a very powerful healing tool.
Yes, I love everything you just said. And for me, this is where I want to focus my work. In the joy, the play, the creativity, the dance, the singing, rhythms, in the healing capacity to reconnect us, and outside of capitalist conditioning of making it a product or a show, just remembering what it is to be around a fire dancing under the moon. And it sounds like a romantic notion, but that is what we're lacking. That is supposed to be a core part of our existence. Cooking together, eating together, singing, dancing, playing, simply being together.
Absolutely, and you can even see it in Western cultures that we are lacking this dancing, this rhythmic dancing together. And what do we have? We have raves. What are raves other than that? Synchronicity through rhythm in groups of people. And there's actually research on rave goers, and that they have changes, like they have positive changes to their inner states.
I've only ever been to one rave myself, and it was quite a traumatic experience, so I don't have much to go by.
It's a part of our innate makeup to be together in rhythm, to be together in attunement, to be together in synchronicity and doing things together. It's not just some hooey-wooey to try and recreate that and put that into the world. It's just really, really needed.
It certainly is. Oh, Lilja, this has been amazing. I just want to ask one more question before we close. You work a lot with chronic pain, and I would love to hear a bit about this and your approach and how you help people move through and exist in better relationship with their bodies even when they're in pain.
We were talking about the defense systems before, the yellow area and then the red area. And then you have the third defense system, which is pain. It's also an alarm bell that is going off in your brain to tell you that now you have to do certain things. You have to show something that is called pain behavior, which is just to take care of the injured part of your body and not use it and clean it up and stuff like that. It's an alarm bell, basically. It's kind of the same as with anxiety. You can have your alarm bell going off without there being any threat. And there's a distinct difference between pain that you have as a symptom of something being wrong, but if the pain persists for 3 months or more, then you have gone from this pain is a symptom to pain being a condition. That means that your alarm bell is broken and it's just going off and going off and going off. And usually at that point in time, you don't really have any cause necessarily for why the alarm bell is going off. And many people with chronic pain have gotten some diagnosis of maybe a disc hernia or something like that. And for example, like with back, with your spine, over 60% of people have a herniated disc, and only some of them have pain with it and some don't. There is no correlation between if there's something wrong with your body and if you have pain. It's all in like how the meaning that you put into your pain. So there was research done on 2 groups of people, soldiers that were seriously injured and people that had just had an operation with kind of the same level of injury. And they were just checking on how much pain the 2 groups were in. And there was a very, very big difference between the soldiers and the people at the hospital. So the soldiers, they had much less pain. They needed much less of pain medication. Because in that group, the pain meant that they were going home to their families and they had done something for their countries. Whereas with the people that just woke up after an operation, the pain meant that they had just been injured. There's loss of work, and it was like bad news. The consequences of the pain were much more serious. So what meaning you assign to your pain has a really big influence on how you experience it. There's a lot of interesting research into that. For example, if you injure your left hand, it really matters if you're a violin player or a dancer. because the violin player really needs the hand, so he's more likely to not get better or experience more pain. Pain and anxiety, those phenomena are much more alike than people usually know. Defense systems gone haywire, and it is possible to retrain your brain to either get the level of chronic pain down, and also to be able to live a better life even despite the chronic pain, and that usually also gets the pain down a few levels.
Yes, I know that my weak area in my back gets more painful when I'm stressed. And I know it's hugely psychosomatic, and yet it feels like such physical pain, like a physical only symptom. Oh, Lilja, thank you so much for this conversation. I really value and respect your wisdom and work, and I'm so grateful to have you as a dear friend.
It's been a pleasure, as always, having a conversation with you.
I hope you have had some juicy takeaways from this episode. Relevant links and references are in the show notes. You can support this podcast by becoming a patron from £1 a month in exchange for serendipitous offerings from our guests and community. We have a wonderful gathering coming up this June 17th to the 22nd in Dorset, England, to celebrate the joyous, transformative and awakening portal of the summer solstice for a radical journey of rebirth. We are opening and closing the week with sweat lodge ceremonies. There'll be daily movement and subconscious journeying, ritual, community connection, forest bathing, beach ceremony, cacao, ecstatic dance, breathwork, ancestral drum making with the incredible Doi Joy, who I mentioned in this episode. And I have an interview with Dory. It was episode number 2. If you haven't listened to it yet, I encourage you to definitely tune into it and tune into her magic. We have various ticket options for this solstice with camping, glamping, shepherd's hut, and a beautiful renovated hay barn. It really is a golden treasure of a find, this location. It's my dear friends James and Lizzie who have built also a natural pool there, and they will be cooking amazing hearty local food with inspiration from Ayurveda. Find out more at rootedhealing.org/summer solstice. I would love to have you there and dance around the fire together. I'm your host, Veronica Stanwell. Come find me on Instagram at Veronica Stanwell, and Rooted Healing is on there also. And let me know what you think about the show. Don't forget to rate and review. We're putting together some ideas for a reviews competition giveaway, so anyone who leaves a review will be entered into that, and details are to follow very soon. Thank you for being here and hanging out with us from wherever you are in the world right now. It means a lot.